Honestly, look at her. Special operator, she says. In that chair? More like special operator of the campus library's handicap-accessible doors. The voice, a braying sound of unearned confidence, belonged to Bryce Thompson, a junior in the university's vaunted business program and a cadet in the ROTC battalion who wore his crisp uniform like a costume he hadn't yet earned the right to. The small crowd of his sycophants, other students who orbited his particular brand of loud arrogance, snickered on cue. They stood near the granite steps of the Thayer Hall of Leadership, a place whose name was an irony so profound it was almost a physical presence in the crisp autumn air. The woman in question, Anya Sharma, didn't flinch. She didn't turn. She didn't give any indication she had even heard him. Her focus was entirely on the task at hand, meticulously cleaning the bearings of the front casters on her wheelchair. It was a custom-built chair, not the standard hospital-issue model. The frame was matte black carbon fiber, impossibly light and rigid, with quick-release hubs on the rear wheels that spoke of high-performance engineering. Her hands, calloused and sure, moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing if you knew what to look for. Each turn of the small wrench, each wipe of the oiled cloth, was a complete, self-contained action, performed with the same focused intent a watchmaker might use to set a final gear. But Bryce and his friends didn't see that. They saw a woman, small in stature even when seated, with her dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional bun. They saw the chair, and to them, the chair was a symbol of weakness, a full stop at the end of a sentence they believed they had already read. They couldn't see the ghost of a 1,000-yard stare in her calm, brown eyes, or the coiled stillness in her shoulders that wasn't weakness, but a state of perpetual, patient readiness. They didn't notice the faded, sand-colored paracord bracelet on her wrist, woven in a cobra stitch, a small, almost invisible tribute to comrades they would never know. They just saw what their assumptions allowed them to see. But for the third-floor window of Thayer Hall, someone else was watching. General Marcus Thorne, a man whose face was a roadmap of campaigns from Desert Storm to the Hindu Kush, stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't looking at Bryce. He was looking at her hands. He saw the precision. He saw the discipline. He saw a ritual he recognized not from a maintenance manual, but from the field, where your life depended on the flawless function of your gear, and every piece of equipment was an extension of your own body, to be maintained with a kind of sacred reverence. He saw the way she aligned the bearings, not just until they were tight, but until the torque was perfect, a thing you feel rather than measure. He had seen hands like that before. He'd seen them assemble an M210 rifle in total darkness in under a minute. He'd seen them suture a wound under fire. He'd seen them fold a flag over a fallen brother. He watched her finish her work, her movements fluid and devoid of any wasted energy, a quiet professional in a world of clamoring noise. The general took a slow sip of his coffee, the silence of his office a stark contrast to the casual cruelty unfolding on the quad below. The students laughed, but their laughter was thin, brittle. Anya Sharma simply spun the caster wheel, listening to the near-silent, perfect hum of well-oiled machinery. It was the only sound that mattered. If you believe that true strength is forged in silence and proven through action, type respect below. The scene was a microcosm of the university's unspoken social hierarchy. Bryce, with his Letterman jacket draped over his ROTC uniform, a violation of protocol he committed with casual impunity, represented the pinnacle of campus prestige. He was the son of a wealthy alumnus, a quarterback on the football team, and a cadet with a presumptive lock on a future commission as an officer, a path he viewed not as a service, but as another box to check on a resume destined for a corner office or congressional seat. His arrogance was a shield and a megaphone, broadcasting a self-importance that few dared to challenge. The audience he cultivated was a mixture of aspiring insiders and timid followers, those who laughed at his jokes not because they were funny, but because laughing was safer than not laughing. It was a currency of social acceptance, and Bryce was minting it at Anya Sharma's expense. She, in their eyes, was an anomaly, an outsider who didn't fit into their neatly organized world. She was older than most undergraduates, having enrolled to finish a political science degree on the G, Bill. She rarely spoke in class, but when she did, her questions were incisive, cutting through academic theory to find the hard, practical core of an issue. Her contributions were often met with a brief, confused silence from professors accustomed to more malleable minds. Today, the particular offense that had drawn Bryce's ire was a guest lecture in their shared international relations seminar. The topic was asymmetric warfare, and the professor had asked the class for modern examples. Bryce had offered a textbook answer about drones and cyber attacks, delivered with the smug certainty of a man who has memorized the chapter summary. Then, Anya had spoken, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. She spoke for less than a minute, detailing the logistical and psychological complexities of establishing a secure operating base in a hostile tribal region with a non-permissive host government, referencing specific Pashtun tribal codes and their impact on intelligence gathering. It wasn't an academic answer, it was a testimony. The professor, a retired State Department official, had been visibly stunned, asking her to elaborate. She had simply said, "That's all I have to add, sir," and fallen silent. The incident had infuriated Bryce. It was a challenge to his self-appointed status as the class's authority on all things military. Her quiet competence was an implicit rebuke to his loud ignorance. So now, on the quad, he was reasserting his dominance in the only way he knew how, through public humiliation, targeting the most visible symbol of her difference, the wheelchair. "You know," he continued, his voice dripping with condescending pity, "it's great the university has these programs for, wounded warriors. Gives them something to do. A little hobby. Keeps their minds busy." He gestured vaguely at her. "But let's be real. The battlefield's no place for that. There are levels to this. We can't all be operators." Anya paused her work. She methodically placed the small wrench on the clean cloth she had laid out on the pavement beside her. She then reached into a side pocket of her pack, a 511 Rush 24, its maul webbing clean and perfectly aligned, and retrieved a bottle of water. She unscrewed the cap with the same deliberate precision, took a sip, and screwed it back on, the faint click of the threads seeding echoing in the small pocket of silence her focus had created. She never once looked at him. Her refusal to engage, her absolute control over her own emotional state, was a language he couldn't comprehend. To him, it was weakness submission. He saw it as his victory. To General Thorne, still watching from his window, it was something else entirely. It was the ultimate form of discipline. It was the calm of a predator that knows it has no need to roar. It was the absolute, unshakable confidence of someone who had faced down threats that would make Bryce Thompson's blood run cold, and had done so without needing an audience. The general recognized the pattern. The loudest voices in the room are often the emptiest. The quietest are the ones you have to listen to. He saw Anya pack her tools away, each in its designated pouch. He saw her check the tire pressure with a practiced push of her thumb. He saw a professional preparing for a world that was constantly, unforgivingly, in motion. Bryce and his friends eventually grew bored of the non-reaction and moved on, their laughter trailing behind them, a fading monument to their own pettiness. Anya remained, her task complete. She sat for a moment longer, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her face a mask of serene neutrality. The silence she carried wasn't empty. It was full of history, of experience, of a competence so profound it required no announcement. The proving ground was not a dusty range in some forgotten desert, but the university's annual Archon Strategic Challenge, a highly prestigious event sponsored by a consortium of think tanks and the Department of Defense. It was a multi-day leadership and crisis simulation that pitted teams from various departments and the ROTC battalion against each other. The scenarios were designed by active-duty war planners and were notoriously complex, involving a brutal mix of geopolitical instability, resource scarcity, and ethical dilemmas. This year's simulation was a nightmare scenario, a viral outbreak in a fictional island nation, compounded by civil war, a collapsed government, and the looming threat of intervention from two rival superpowers. It was a test of strategy, logistics, diplomacy, and nerve. Bryce's team, predictably composed of his fellow ROTC cadets and business school acolytes, was the clear favorite. They strode into the simulation hall, a massive auditorium filled with computer terminals, maps, and a central command stage, with the swagger of a team that had already won. Their strategy, as Bryce loudly articulated to anyone within earshot, was one of overwhelming force projection. They would secure the capital, control the media narrative, and strong-arm the warring factions into submission. It was a strategy as subtle as a hammer. Anya Sharma was also competing. She hadn't formed a team. Instead, she had entered as a singleton advisor, a role the competition allowed for individuals to be assigned to struggling teams as a wild card. She was assigned to a team of engineering and pre-med students, a group of brilliant but disorganized individuals who were completely out of their depth and on the verge of being eliminated in the first phase. They huddled around their terminal, bickering over epidemiological data and logistical models, while the simulation clock bled away precious minutes. Bryce's team made their move. They allocated their virtual forces to seize the capital's airport and presidential palace. On the giant screen that dominated the hall, their icons flashed green, indicating initial success. Bryce smirked, crossing his arms. It was a textbook, first-year military academy solution. Then, the simulation's controllers, a group of grim-faced colonels and RAND Corporation analysts, introduced the first twist. The deposed president had fled not to a military bunker, but to the main city hospital, which was also the epicenter of the outbreak. Simultaneously, a rebel faction blew the city's main water treatment plant, accusing the president of hoarding medical supplies. Bryce's forces were now bogged down in an urban quagmire, facing a humanitarian catastrophe and a public relations nightmare. His force projection had become an occupation, and his team began to hemorrhage points. The engineering students looked defeated. "We can't fix the water plant and secure the hospital at the same time," one of them lamented. "Our resource allocation models are maxed out." It was then that Anya spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, cutting through their panicked chatter. "Forget the capital," she said. The team stared at her. "The capital isn't the center of gravity. The president is a liability and the rebels are a distraction." She pointed to a small, insignificant-looking town on the map, a coastal village named Port Oleron. "This is the key. The simulation data says it has the only deep water port on the island, and it's controlled by a local militia that has declared neutrality. They're fishermen, traders. They're pragmatic." She began to issue a series of quiet, precise instructions. "You," she said to a pre-med student, "retask our medical supply allocation. Forget the CDC-style mass distribution. Create small, mobile medical teams. We're not stopping the plague. We're treating the influential. Target the family members of the Port Oleron militia leaders. Build goodwill. Use our intelligence assets to find out who they are." To an engineering student, she said, "Draft a plan to repair their fishing fleet. Their engines are old Soviet models. Our technical specs show we have the parts. Don't give them to them. Offer to trade our expertise for safe passage of food and medical supplies through their port." She laid out a strategy that completely ignored the primary conflict. It was a plan based not on force, but on leverage, stability, and human intelligence. It was slow, methodical, and completely counterintuitive. As Anya's plan unfolded on the main screen, it was almost invisible at first. While Bryce's team was issuing loud press releases and moving armored columns through a hostile city, Anya's team was dispatching single medical advisors and small engineering teams into a town nobody was paying attention to. The judges, including General Thorne, watched with growing interest. On the surface, her team was doing nothing to solve the main crisis. They were losing points for failing to engage the primary antagonists. Bryce, noticing this, laughed out loud. "They're fixing fishing boats while the country burns down. What a joke." But General Thorne saw the genius in it. She wasn't playing the game. She was changing the board. He recognized the doctrine. The simulation was designed to force teams to pick a side, to align with one of the global powers, effectively failing the test of maintaining sovereignty. Bryce's team, trapped and desperate, began leaking intelligence to one of the superpowers in exchange for air support. It was a fatal error. The moment the first drone strike hit, the simulation flashed a massive penalty for loss of national autonomy. Their score plummeted. At that exact moment, Anya made her move. A single message, drafted by her, was sent from the Port Aleron militia to both superpowers. The message was a masterpiece of diplomacy and deterrence. It announced that the port, now fully operational and secured by a loyal and healthy local populace, was open for the distribution of international humanitarian aid from any nation, under the sole condition that all foreign military assets remain offshore. It offered a de-escalation ramp that both powers could accept without losing face. It was a checkmate. The simulation controllers, the seasoned colonels, stared at the screen. They had run this scenario dozens of times with elite military academy teams. No one had ever stabilized the board without capitulating to one of the superpowers. No one had ever identified the port as the strategic center of gravity. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. All eyes turned from the main screen to the small, quiet woman in the wheelchair who was calmly sipping her water, her face betraying no emotion. Bryce was speechless. His confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated shock. That's not possible," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't even fight. The room, which had been buzzing with the noise of 100 competing teams, fell into a profound and deafening silence. In that silence, the only sound was the gentle hum of the servers processing an outcome they had never anticipated. Anya Sharma had not just won the game. She had demonstrated a level of strategic understanding that was not merely academic, but was born of something harder, something truer, something forged in the crucible of real-world conflict. Her demonstration of skill was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, irrefutable proof of competence that left no room for argument or assumption. General Marcus Thorne rose from his seat in the judge's box. The movement was deliberate, commanding the attention of the entire hall. The silence deepened, charged with anticipation. He didn't walk to the main stage or the podium. Instead, he descended the steps and walked directly across the floor toward the small, unassuming workstation where Anya and her stunned teammates sat. The colonels and analysts on the judging panel watched him, their faces a mixture of curiosity and reverence. A four-star general did not move without purpose. Bryce and his team stood frozen, their own failure forgotten in the face of this new, unexpected drama. The general stopped directly in front of Anya's wheelchair. He did not look down at her with pity or condescension. He looked at her as an equal, his gaze direct and filled with a dawning, profound respect. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low baritone that resonated through the silent auditorium. That was not a strategy derived from the curriculum of this university. That was operational doctrine 7-2, unconventional warfare in literal zones. Specifically, the all-Iran gambit, a tactic developed in theater and highly classified. There are only a handful of people who have successfully executed it. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The students looked on, confused. The ROTC cadets felt a prickle of unease. They knew doctrine, but they had never heard of that designation. Anya simply met the general's gaze, her expression unchanging. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "It was the logical solution, General," she said, her voice even. "The only one that ensured host nation autonomy." The general's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in confirmation. He had his answer. He turned to one of his aides, a young major who was scrambling to keep up. "Major, bring me the tablet. Access the secured personnel database." JSOC archives. The major hurried to his side, handing him a ruggedized military tablet. General Thorne's fingers, thick but surprisingly nimble, tapped across the encrypted screen. He typed in a name. Sharma. Anya. The auditorium was so quiet that the soft clicks of the virtual keyboard were audible in the back row. A file appeared on the screen, its header stamped with red digital letters. Top secret //SCI // no foreign. The general's face, already stern, hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated awe. He stood up straighter, his posture shifting from that of a judge to that of a soldier in the presence of a superior. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice now booming with authority. "Allow me to introduce the person you have been sharing a classroom with." He read from the screen, his words falling like hammer blows on the stunned silence. "Commander Unknown Sharma, United States Navy. Last billet. Executive Officer, Naval Special Warfare Development Group." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. DevGru. The name itself was legendary, the official designation for the unit more commonly known to the public as SEAL Team 6. The most elite, secretive, and lethal fighting force in the American arsenal. Bryce's face went white. The color drained from it as if a plug had been pulled. The general wasn't finished. He continued, his voice sharp and precise, listing her accomplishments like a battle citation. Recipient of the Navy Cross for actions of extraordinary heroism during Operation Desert Viper. Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry during the hostage rescue at the Ambani Embassy. Bronze Star with valor, 3 of them, and the Purple Heart. He paused, his eyes lifting from the screen to look directly at her wheelchair. Awarded 4 times, the final words hung in the air, a devastating explanation for her physical condition. The chair wasn't a symbol of weakness. It was a testament to survival. It was a monument to sacrifice. The revelation was a tectonic shift in the reality of every person in that room. The assumptions they had built their world upon crumbled into dust. The quiet, unassuming woman in the wheelchair was not a victim to be pitied or an outsider to be mocked. She was a giant, a warrior of a caliber that most of them could only read about in books. She was the very definition of the quiet professional, a living embodiment of the ethos that the most dangerous people in a room are the ones who have no need to prove it. General Thorne lowered the tablet. He turned to face Anya fully. In a move that shocked every soldier, cadet, and civilian present, he snapped his heels together, his back ramrod straight, and rendered a perfect, razor-sharp salute. It was not the casual salute one gives a junior officer. It was a salute of profound respect, a gesture reserved for Medal of Honor recipients, for fallen comrades, for true heroes. "Commander Sharma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is an honor, ma'am." The word ma'am, delivered from a 4-star general to a student, was the final, crushing validation. It reordered the universe. Anya looked up at him. For the first time, a flicker of something other than calm neutrality crossed her face. It was a deep, weary gratitude. She raised her hand, not in a return salute. Protocol for a retired officer being saluted by an active one was complex, but in a simple, dignified gesture of acknowledgement. "At ease, General," she said softly. "Thank you." General Thorne held the salute for a moment longer before slowly lowering his hand. He then turned his steely gaze upon the assembled students, and his eyes found Bryce Thompson. His expression was one of cold, unmitigated fury. "You," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low growl. "Cadet." Front and center, Bryce stumbled forward as if pulled by an invisible string, his face a mask of terror and shame. He stood before the general, trembling slightly. "You, who wear that uniform, who aspire to lead soldiers, saw fit to publicly mock a warrior who has bled more for this country than you could ever comprehend. You mistook sacrifice for weakness. You mistook humility for meekness. You saw a wheelchair, and your mind, in its infinite ignorance, closed. You are a disgrace to that uniform, and you have failed the most fundamental test of leadership, to see the person, not the assumption." He gestured back toward Anya. "That is what a leader looks like. Someone whose actions are their resume. Someone whose silence is more meaningful than your loudest boast." Lesson 1, which you will remember every day for the rest of your life. Respect is earned, not given. And you, son, have a debt to pay that you can never hope to repay. He dismissed Bryce with a contemptuous wave of his hand. "Get out of my sight," Bryce scrambled away, his face burning with a shame so profound it was almost a physical wound. The general then addressed the entire room. Let this be a lesson to all of you. The heroes who defend this nation do not always look like they do in the movies. They're walking among you. They're in your classrooms. They're your neighbors. And they carry burdens you cannot imagine, with a quiet dignity you should strive to emulate. This competition is over. Commander Sharma's team has won. The story of what happened in the Archon Strategic Challenge did not just spread, it detonated. It moved through the campus with the speed of a digital wildfire, leaping from text messages to social media posts, from whispered conversations in the dining hall to stunned debriefings in the ROTC barracks. The legend of Commander Anya Sharma was born not in the fire of combat, but in the profound silence of a university auditorium. By the next morning, everyone knew. The details became mythic in the retelling. How she had outthought the war planners, how she had used compassion as a weapon, how a four-star general had saluted her. The video of the general's speech, surreptitiously filmed on a student's phone, went viral, breaking containment of the campus and rocketing across military networks and veterans forums worldwide. It became a touchstone, a modern parable for a community that deeply understood its central lesson. Bryce Thompson became a ghost. He withdrew from the ROTC program the next day, citing personal reasons. He was seen on campus only rarely after that, a solitary figure who seemed to have physically shrunk, the boisterous arrogance that had been his defining feature utterly extinguished, replaced by a permanent, haunted expression of shame. The change in him was palpable. He no longer sought the center of attention. He fled from it. He had been publicly humbled, not by a punch or an insult, but by the sheer, undeniable weight of someone else's quiet competence, and it had broken his brittle ego. The true vindication, however, was not Bryce's downfall. It was the spontaneous, organic outpouring of respect for Anya. She arrived for her political philosophy class 2 days after the competition to find her usual route to the lecture hall blocked. A crowd of students had gathered, but they weren't blocking her path. They were forming 2 silent, respectful lines, creating a clear path for her. As she wheeled through, no one spoke. They just watched, their faces a mixture of awe and admiration. It was a spontaneous honor guard, a civilian salute. Anya, for her part, remained unchanged. She deflected praise with a quiet, "thank you," and continued her studies with the same methodical focus as before. When a group of younger ROTC cadets, looking for mentorship, nervously approached her in the library, she didn't lecture them on strategy. She spoke to them about discipline, about the importance of listening more than speaking, and about the fundamental duty of a leader to care for their people. Her philosophy was simple. Competence is quiet. Let your actions be your voice. But the most powerful demonstration was yet to come. The following Friday, the university held its annual military appreciation football game. General Thorne had been invited as the guest of honor for the coin toss. As Anya was leaving her last class of the day, she heard a sound that was both alien and deeply familiar on the college campus. It was the rhythmic, percussive sound of boots. Not one pair, but dozens, marching in perfect unison on the pavement. She looked up and saw them. Marching down the main campus thoroughfare, in perfect formation, were 90 United States Marines from the local infantry battalion at Camp Lejeune. They were in their dress blues, a river of midnight blue, scarlet, and gold flowing through the heart of the university. They were not shouting or chanting. They marched in a powerful, disciplined silence. Students and faculty stopped in their tracks, their phones coming out, their mouths agape. The Marines marched past the library, past the student union, and came to a halt directly in front of Anya. The lead officer, a captain with eyes as hard as steel, called them to attention. Then, in a single, unified motion that sent a shock wave through the air, all 90 Marines rendered a flawless salute. The 90 Marines held their salute, a silent, unblinking tribute. They were a living statue garden of respect, their white gloves and polished brass gleaming in the afternoon sun. Traffic on the campus loop had stopped. Students hung out of dorm room windows, their conversations reduced to hushed whispers. The message was unmistakable and overwhelming. This was not about intimidation. It was about honor. It was the tribe recognizing one of its own, a public declaration that Anya Sharma, despite her civilian clothes and her academic surroundings, was still part of a brotherhood forged in hardship and sacrifice. She was one of them, and they would not allow her honor to be questioned or her service to be forgotten. Anya watched them, her disciplined composure finally cracking, just for a second. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away with a quick, practiced motion, but the emotion was there, a brief glimpse into the heart of the warrior who had been forced to carry her burdens in silence for so long. The captain held the salute for a full 30 seconds before giving the crisp order to carry on. The Marines lowered their arms in unison, executed a perfect flanking maneuver, and marched away as they had come, their discipline absolute, their purpose fulfilled. They had delivered their message without speaking a single word. The event cemented the legend. It was no longer just a campus story. It was an institutional touchstone. The Marine salute became part of the university's folklore. Later that week, Bryce Thompson sought Anya out. He found her in a quiet corner of the campus garden, reading a book. He approached her hesitantly, his former swagger completely gone. He looked like a defendant approaching the bench for sentencing. "Ma'am," he began, his voice cracking. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Commander Sharma, I wanted to apologize. What I said, what I did, there's no excuse. It was ignorant and arrogant, and I was wrong. I'm so sorry." He stood there, his hands clenched at his sides, bracing for a rebuke, for a dismissal, for anything. Anya slowly placed a bookmark in her book and closed it. She looked up at him, her gaze not angry, but analytical, assessing. She saw not the arrogant bully from the quad, but a young man who had been forced to confront the vastness of his own ignorance. She saw the potential for him to learn, to grow. "You disrespected the uniform, cadet," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Not me. The mistake you made was thinking that uniform makes you strong. It doesn't. It's a responsibility. It's a promise to be better than you are. Your apology is noted." "Don't waste the lesson," Bryce nodded, swallowing hard. "I won't," he whispered. "I promise." He turned and walked away, not with the shame of a defeated bully, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had been given a second chance, a new direction. Anya had given him the gift of a hard-earned lesson, and in doing so, had perhaps set him on the path to becoming the kind of leader he had once only pretended to be. The quiet professional had done her job once again. She had identified a problem, applied a precise solution, and improved her surroundings, all without raising her voice. Her actions continued to ripple outward, creating positive change in their wake. A year later, the culture at the university had tangibly shifted. The Thayer Hall of Leadership, once a monument to theoretical knowledge, now bore a new, unassuming bronze plaque near its entrance. It didn't bear a long inscription. It simply read, "The Sharma Principle. Competence is quiet." The story of Commander Sharma and the Archon Challenge had become required reading for all incoming ROTC cadets. It was taught not as a lesson in strategy, but as a lesson in character. The cadre now emphasized humility, observation, and the critical importance of respecting the unseen experiences of others. The program's reputation, once known for producing arrogant ring knockers, began to change. It started turning out quiet, thoughtful junior officers who were praised for their maturity and their ability to listen. Bryce Thompson, to everyone's surprise, had re-enlisted in the Army after graduating, choosing to enter as a private. He had written a letter to the university's newspaper, explaining his decision. He wrote that he needed to earn the right to lead from the ground up, to understand the life of an enlisted soldier before he ever dared to command one. He wrote that Commander Sharma had taught him that true strength wasn't about giving orders, but about earning trust. His journey of atonement was long, but it was sincere. Anya Sharma completed her degree with honors. She politely declined offers to teach at the university or consult for the Department of Defense. On the day of her graduation, as the students filed into the stadium, General Thorne, who had flown in specifically for the ceremony, was waiting for her. He wasn't in uniform. He was in a simple civilian suit. He didn't salute her. He just shook her hand. "What's next for you, Commander?" he asked. Anya looked out at the graduating class, at the hopeful, ambitious faces of the next generation. "There's a nonprofit I've been working with," she said. "They build custom prosthetics and mobility solutions for veterans. Good engineering problems. Good people." It was a typical answer for her. Humble, practical, and focused on service. She had no interest in monuments or accolades. Her legacy wasn't in the past, in the medals she had won or the battles she had fought. It was in the future, in the lives she could improve, in the quiet, positive changes she could effect in the world. Her work was not done. The quiet professionals, the Anya Sharmas of the world, never believe their work is done. They do not seek the spotlight. They seek the next mission. They do not crave applause. They crave purpose. They are the architects of our security and the guardians of our peace, operating in the silent spaces between the headlines. They are proof that character is not defined by what you say, but by what you do when no one is watching. Their legacy is not etched in stone, but in the lives they touch, the standards they set, and the quiet example they provide for the rest of us. The real measure of a person's worth is not found in the volume of their voice, but in the depth of their character. It is not displayed in arrogant pronouncements, but demonstrated in disciplined action. In a world that constantly rewards the loudest, the most visible, and the most self-promoting, we often forget where true strength resides. It resides in the quiet corners, in the unassuming individuals who have faced the crucible and emerged not with a need for recognition, but with a profound understanding of their own capabilities. They carry their history not as a badge to be flashed, but as a foundation upon which they build their every action. Anya Sharma's story became more than just folklore. It became a teaching parable. It taught a generation of students and future leaders that assumptions are the enemy of wisdom. It taught them that the most formidable people are often the ones you overlook, because their confidence is internal, requiring no external validation. They do not need to tell you who they are. They simply are. Her legacy wasn't the plaque on the wall or the story told to freshmen. It was the ripple effect of her quiet competence. It was in the cadet who chose to listen before he spoke. It was in the student who defended a classmate from mockery. It was in the professor who re-evaluated how they measured a student's potential. True legacy isn't something you leave behind. It's what you inspire to move forward. It's the quiet standard of excellence that others feel compelled to live up to long after you're gone. The world is full of noise, of people shouting to be heard, to be seen, to be acknowledged. But the work that matters, the progress that endures, is almost always accomplished in the quiet. It is accomplished by the steady hands, the calm minds, and the disciplined hearts of the quiet professionals who have mastered their craft so completely that they have nothing left to prove. They are the bedrock upon which we build everything else. So the next time you're tempted to judge by appearance, to dismiss based on a first impression, or to equate silence with weakness, remember the story of the woman in the wheelchair. Remember that you may be standing in the presence of a giant, and the only thing your arrogance will accomplish is to reveal the smallness of your own character. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance, and where professional discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.